What two young boys said behind him made the CEO stop in his tracks. Before we go further, please ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories like this one. The city buzzed below, cars honking, pedestrians flowing like rivers through crosswalks, storefronts blinking under the late morning sun in California. From his corner office on the 27th floor, Mr. Thompson could see it all. The world looked small from here. Too small. He leaned back in his leather chair, staring at a glowing monitor filled with charts, numbers, and heat maps. Everything looked fine. In fact, better than fine. Quarterly profits were up. Customer traffic held steady. Online engagement metrics boasted sharp green arrows pointing skyward. But something tugged at him. A quiet, gnawing sense that behind the numbers, something was off. A report on his desk caught his eye: customer feedback, Q1. He flipped it open. Words like cold service, unfriendly tone, and disconnected staff popped from the page. Not everywhere, but in enough locations to make his stomach tighten. He'd built this brand from scratch, starting with a single food truck and a borrowed recipe. Now, it was a nationwide franchise. Yet lately, it felt more like a machine than a mission. He stood abruptly and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The sun cast sharp reflections on the glass towers around him. He thought back to the early days, when he used to talk to every customer, shake every hand, even take out the trash. That version of him seemed distant now, like a character from someone else's story. Then he made a decision. No board meeting, no email memo, just action. He opened a closet, pulled out a hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, clothes that hadn't seen daylight in years. He swapped his luxury watch for a plastic one and tucked his sleek wallet away, replacing it with a modest bifold. He took one last look in the mirror. The transformation was subtle, but striking. The CEO had vanished. In his place stood just another middle-aged man with a neutral expression and a quiet curiosity. He didn't call for his driver. Instead, he left through the service elevator and walked 2 blocks to the nearest subway station. As the train roared into the tunnel, Thompson stepped aboard, blending into the crowd. No one gave him a second glance. He was just another commuter now, surrounded by lives he rarely touched, but relied on every day. The ride was bumpy, filled with the scent of worn coats, fast food wrappers, and human fatigue. But it felt honest, real. 30 minutes later, he emerged in a neighborhood he hadn't visited in years. It wasn't one of their flagship locations, just a regular branch in a working-class part of the city. The sign outside was slightly faded. A teenager in an apron swept the sidewalk, earbuds in, lips syncing to music only he could hear. Thompson crossed the street, shoved his hands into his pockets, and joined the lunch rush line. Inside, the place buzzed with energy, workers taking orders, shouting over the fryer's hiss, the cash register chiming, and customers huddled around tables. He scanned the room. The counters had smudges. The menu screens flickered once or twice. The manager, a woman in her 30s, moved with the speed of someone trying to do 3 jobs at once. The line inched forward. Thompson watched a cashier greet a young mother with a smile, even though exhaustion lined her face. Another employee handled a refund with calm efficiency. There was warmth in the air, but also a kind of survival mode tension. When it was nearly his turn to order, he heard voices behind him, soft, hesitant, but close enough to catch. "I hope we have enough," one boy whispered. Thompson didn't turn. "Mom said this might be our only real meal today." He felt his shoulders stiffen. The second voice, slightly deeper, maybe an older brother, replied, "If we don't, maybe we can split a burger again." The line moved forward, but Thompson didn't. His feet remained planted. For a moment, the restaurant noise dulled to a distant hum. All he could hear were those quiet, brave words from 2 boys who couldn't have been more than 10. He finally turned his head slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse. The boys stood shoulder to shoulder. Their jackets were too thin for the weather. One had a scuffed backpack slung over both shoulders. In their hands, a small pile of coins and crumpled bills. He blinked slowly. This wasn't an anecdote in a report. This wasn't a marketing problem or a franchise guideline. This was why he'd started in the first place. The cashier called out, "Next." Thompson approached, voice low. "One moment, please." Then, almost inaudibly, he added, "Whatever those boys order, it's on me. And give them something extra." The cashier hesitated, confused. Thompson gently nodded. "Quietly, please." She smiled in understanding and rang it up without a word. Thompson stepped aside, pretending to study the menu again. He watched as the boys reached the counter. When they handed over their small stack of coins, the cashier waved it off. "You're covered today," she said kindly. "Someone already paid." The boys exchanged puzzled glances, then grinned as they received full meals, burgers, fries, even milkshakes. One of them whispered, "Thank you," to the air, unsure who to direct it to. Thompson smiled faintly, heart heavier than it had been in years. He didn't order anything for himself. He simply walked to a corner table and sat down, watching the restaurant, not as a CEO, but as someone rediscovering the truth behind the business. What mattered wasn't just how fast the service was or how clean the counters looked. It was who walked through those doors and why they came. The moment Thompson stepped inside, he was hit by a wall of sound. Orders being shouted, timers beeping, the low hum of conversations, and the metallic clatter of a tray hitting the floor. The restaurant pulsed with the chaos of a typical lunch rush. Booths were filled, the line snaked to the door, and the smell of fries and grilled meat hung thick in the air. He lingered just inside, blending into the crowd. No one gave him a second glance. Behind the counter, staff moved in a controlled frenzy. A teenage boy at the fryer wiped sweat from his forehead while juggling baskets of fries. A woman in her 20s handled orders at the register, her eyes rimmed with fatigue but her voice warm. The manager, a tall woman with a headset clamp tied over her ponytail, paced between the front and back like a field general, answering questions, fixing issues, and stepping in wherever the system threatened to collapse. Thompson took it all in, the pace, the pressure, the small kindnesses, and the cracks in the system. A customer snapped at a cashier over a missing sauce packet. The cashier, instead of reacting, smiled gently, apologized, and handled the situation with grace. It caught Thompson's attention. That kind of patience couldn't be trained. It came from character. Her badge read Emily. He made a mental note. 3 spots ahead, a young man took his order and barely made eye contact. The interaction was robotic, swift, accurate, forgettable. Thompson noticed his name tag was missing and his shirt was untucked. Efficiency over empathy. Another note. As he waited in line, the rhythm of the restaurant revealed itself. Everything ran on timing, orders shouted, food assembled, trays passed down the line like an assembly line with human hands. Every slip, every second of delay, rippled outward. A tray nearly toppled as a newer employee tried to balance too many drinks. The manager caught it midair and simply said, "One tray at a time, Marcus," before rushing off again. She was running damage control constantly, and Thompson could see it was wearing her thin. She wasn't neglecting her job, she was just outnumbered. A mother holding a toddler struggled to carry her tray to a table. No one around noticed, but Emily, between ringing up 2 orders, stepped from behind the counter to help her without saying a word. The woman thanked her, clearly surprised. Emily offered a tired smile, then returned to her station without fanfare. That moment struck Thompson harder than any data report ever had. For years, he'd read summaries of how frontline workers impacted the brand image, but it never hit like this. Watching someone stretch themselves beyond their limit for a job that likely paid her barely enough to survive. He continued inching forward, noting how some employees communicated with eye signals and subtle gestures. It was like a dance, part instinct, part exhaustion. You couldn't see this from a spreadsheet. This wasn't the part of the business that got filtered up to quarterly briefings or slick marketing decks. But it was the heartbeat. Behind the counter, the kitchen was a different world, noisy, hot, fast. A tall cook barked something about missing patties while another flipped burgers without looking. It wasn't dysfunctional, but it wasn't thriving either. This was survival. Thompson noticed the corners where equipment had rust stains. A soda fountain with one, out-of-order, nozzle. An air vent layered in dust. Details most customers might overlook, but to him screamed neglect, systemic, accumulated over time. He found himself wondering, when was the last time corporate had really listened to this team? When had they sent someone who wasn't just there to audit, but to understand? The line moved again, and now he was one person away from the counter. A father with 2 kids ordered combo meals, then asked the cashier if there was still a discount for families. The cashier hesitated. She didn't know. She called for the manager. "No, sir," the manager replied while refilling the ice machine. "We stopped that promo last year." The man's smile faltered. "Ah, okay. No problem." He still paid, but Thompson noticed the subtle slump in his shoulders as he led the kids to a booth. Just one more family, stretching what they had. Then came the voices. Faint at first, just behind him in the line. "I hope we have enough." That scene was just beginning. But for now, Thompson stood in silence, soaking in the symphony of stress and service around him. No one recognized him. No one treated him any differently. He wasn't Mr. Thompson here. He was just another customer in line. And it was exactly what he needed. Standing amid the noise and motion, he wasn't judging. He was absorbing, watching who cracked under pressure and who rose above it, observing how one moment of kindness could ripple further than 100 well-placed ads. It wasn't about perfection, it was about effort, authenticity, and resilience. He thought of his own training programs back at HQ, standardized, glossy, and often out of touch. What he was seeing now, it didn't match the slide decks. Emily greeted the next customer, offered a tired hi, welcome to Lively Bites, and glanced up at Thompson with a polite smile. He nodded and took a breath, stepping forward. Hey, he said. She nodded, fingers hovering over the register. What can I get for you? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past her, to the kitchen, to the line, to the boys behind him whose voices he had just started to notice, to the floor tiles that needed scrubbing, to the hands that made all of it work day after day. And he realized this was his company, not the quarterly numbers, not the branding team's latest catchphrase. This, right here, the pressure, the grace, the weariness, the unseen heroism. This was the truth of it. And for the first time in years, he was seeing it clearly. Thompson stepped forward. Emily, the cashier, offered a weary but polite smile. Her fingers hovered over the register, ready to tap in his order. He was about to speak when the door behind him jingled and two boys entered, their footsteps light, almost uncertain. He didn't turn right away, but something about their presence pulled at the edges of his attention. A shift in the energy, a hush between words, the clink of coins being nervously handled. Then he heard it, faint, but unmistakable. I hope we have enough. They were reminders. Reminders of what this place was supposed to be, what it still could be. He used to believe in that years ago, when the company was small, and he still worked the counters himself. Back when every burger felt like it meant something. Back when he remembered faces, not just sales. At some point, growth became the goal. Scaling up, streamlining, maximizing throughput per hour. And it worked. They had locations in almost every state now. But in chasing the numbers, he'd lost sight of the people who lived in the margins. Like these boys. One of them held the burger up like a trophy before taking a giant bite. Ketchup smeared at the corner of his mouth, but he didn't notice. He was too focused, savoring every taste. The younger one dipped a fry into his shake and laughed at the flavor, eyes lighting up. That laugh hit Thompson harder than he expected. It was pure. It was grateful. It was exactly what he'd forgotten this business was supposed to create. He exhaled slowly, shifting his weight. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a CEO. Not the type with corner offices and quarterly reports, anyway. He felt like a man watching something real happen and realizing he'd nearly built an empire without it. From the side, Emily approached the table again, this time with a tray carrying 2 slices of warm pie. The boys looked up, astonished. You forgot dessert, she said, her voice kind. The older one tried to refuse, clearly overwhelmed. She winked. It's already paid for. They looked around again, searching, still wondering who had done it. But Thompson didn't move. He just smiled quietly and looked away. It was better this way. Anonymous. No headlines. No attention. Just a silent act of reconnection. He stayed a few more minutes, long enough to see the last bites eaten, the last crumbs wiped from fingers onto jeans. Then the boys stood, careful with their trash, and carried it to the bin like it mattered. One of them glanced around one last time before pushing the door open. Then they were gone, swallowed into the afternoon light. Thompson remained still. He didn't need to follow them. The lesson was already learned. He had enough data, enough insight. But more importantly, he had a new truth. This business, his business, wasn't just about serving meals quickly and cheaply. It was about what those meals represented to people in moments of need. It was about dignity, about giving someone the small luxury of feeling full, safe, and cared for, if only for 15 minutes in a fast food booth. He turned to Emily as he left, pausing just long enough to say, "You're really good at what you do." She smiled, surprised. "Thank you." Outside, the sun had moved a little higher in the sky. The city sounded different now. Not louder or quieter, but clearer. Thompson didn't need another report to tell him what mattered. He had just witnessed it, in the most ordinary, extraordinary way. Thud, muffling the sounds of clinking trays and casual chatter out front. Thompson stood beside the manager, who looked nervous, understandably so. After all, a man claiming to be a regional inspector showing up unannounced during a lunch rush was enough to rattle anyone. Thompson hadn't pulled rank, not directly. He'd introduced himself simply. I'm with corporate oversight, health, employee welfare, and service audits. Surprise drop-in. It was vague enough to avoid scrutiny, yet authoritative enough to gain the door behind the counter clicked shut with a dull access. The manager, a thin man with tired eyes and a name tag that read, Rick, led the way through the narrow kitchen. The deeper they went, the more the shine wore off. Stainless steel appliances gave way to cracked tiles and flickering overhead lights. The air grew warmer, heavier. The hum of machinery mixed with the sound of simmering oil and sharp orders from the back line. Apologies for the mess, Rick said, his tone rushed, defensive. We've been short-staffed all week. 2 people called out. And the fryer's been acting up again. Thompson nodded, saying nothing. He didn't need to hear explanations. He could see the truth for himself. A young man at the grill wiped sweat from his forehead with a forearm already smudged with grease. His shirt clung to his back. Nearby, a woman, barely older than 25, was prepping sandwich wrappers at lightning speed while bouncing between food bins, her name tag crooked and half hanging off. The staff moved like clockwork, but the energy felt strained. There was no rhythm, only urgency. And no one looked up. No smiles. No chatter. Just function. Rick led him into a cramped storage room that doubled as the break area. It had one battered folding chair, a microwave from another era, and a mini fridge with a sign taped to it. Please don't leave expired milk again. Here's where the team gets their 15, Rick said, gesturing awkwardly. We rotate fast during peak hours. 15. Thompson looked around. There wasn't even a proper table. No air conditioning unit. Just a fan on a crate buzzing low, spinning slightly crooked. He turned to Rick. How often do breaks get skipped? Rick hesitated. We try not to let that happen. But when it gets really busy, he trailed off. We manage. That word again, manage. It echoed through the room like a guilty admission. Mind if I talk to some of the crew? Thompson asked. Rick blinked, then shrugged. Sure. Just, don't get them into trouble, yeah? Back in the kitchen, Thompson approached the young woman from earlier, now stuffing sandwich buns into a warming drawer. Busy day? He asked casually. She glanced at him, then back to her work. Every day's busy. He leaned on the metal prep counter, lowering his voice. You like working here? She stopped for a second. I like the people, she said carefully. Not so much the pace. Or the pay. Management treat you well? She gave a half shrug. Rick does what he can. But he's stretched thin too. Another staffer, a tall man with a towel slung over his shoulder, chimed in from the fryer. We used to get bonuses for peak hour shifts. Haven't seen those in a while. A third, older woman with tired eyes and gentle hands, joined in while wiping down trays. I've been here 4 years. Raised 2 kids on this job. Sometimes I skip lunch so they can eat dinner. Thompson looked at her. She wasn't bitter, just worn. Her voice didn't carry complaint, only truth. He nodded. Thank you for sharing that. They didn't know who he was. Not yet. And that made their words hit harder. Raw. Unfiltered. He watched as another employee leaned against the dish sink, flexing a sore wrist. The gloves provided were thin. The soap, watered down. The kitchen ceiling tiles above the sink were stained with old leaks. This wasn't just a bad day. It was a broken pattern. Rick returned, clipboard in hand. Everything okay? Thompson straightened. Just observing. Thanks for the tour. Rick gave a faint smile. We do our best. It's not perfect, but the team shows up. That much was true. They showed up despite exhaustion, despite faulty equipment and inadequate spaces, despite the corporate training videos preaching team culture, while the reality offered barely livable wages. As Thompson exited through the back and stood in the alley behind the store, he let out a slow breath. The roar of the kitchen still echoed in his head, but louder now was a deeper understanding. This wasn't one failing location. This was a window into something systemic. His company prided itself on volume, on speed, on standardization. But somewhere in the scaling, the soul had been lost. The foundation, the people, had been stretched too thin to hold it up. What was the point of streamlining supply chains or optimizing kitchen flow if the very people holding the spatulas and trays were hanging on by threads? He glanced back at the door. The same door his employees used to enter every day, carrying more than bags and uniforms. They brought bills, childcare worries, student loans, fractured sleep, and hunger, not just for food, but for acknowledgement. The data on his desk never mentioned that. No quarterly report could measure skipped meals. He pulled out his phone, opened the Notes app, and typed just 3 words. We forgot them. It was time to remember. Morning sunlight glinted off the glass windows of the restaurant as Thompson stepped out of a black sedan. Gone were the jeans and hoodie. Today, he wore a tailored navy blue suit, crisp white shirt, and polished shoes that echoed confidence. His tie was understated, but the way he carried himself now turned heads immediately. Inside, the usual buzz of prep and chatter slowed as staff turned toward the entrance. The cashier, the young woman who had impressed him with her patience and warmth the day before, froze mid-swipe of a loyalty card. Rick, the manager, emerged from the back with a puzzled frown that quickly twisted into concern. Thompson walked past the counter, his eyes scanning familiar faces. He offered a polite smile, but it wasn't his usual corporate mask. It carried something more sincere. Something earned. Could I ask everyone to gather in the dining area, please? He said clearly. Silence fell. Workers looked at each other, unsure. It won't take long, he added. But it's important. Reluctantly, employees removed gloves, wiped hands on aprons, and filed out from the kitchen. Customers were gently redirected to another location by the assistant manager, and within minutes, the dining space was filled only with the team. Thompson stood near the soda machine, hands folded calmly. I imagine you're wondering who I am, he began, and why I asked you to stop work during a busy shift. The young man from the fryer yesterday leaned forward. You're not a health inspector, are you? No, Thompson said, with a slight smile. I'm not. My name is Robert Thompson. I'm the CEO of this company. A collective gasp rolled through the room like a quiet wave. Forks paused midair. Eyes widened. The cashier blinked, stunned. Rick paled. No way, someone muttered. But it was true. The CEO, the man whose face had only ever been seen in company emails and quarterly video addresses, was standing right there, beneath their flickering fluorescent lights. I came here yesterday in disguise because I wanted to understand what this place feels like when no one's watching, Thompson said. Not as a corporate report. Not through filtered data or polished metrics. I wanted the truth. And I got it. He paused, letting that settle. I saw long hours. Faulty equipment. A fryer overdue for replacement. A break room that hardly counts as a room. I watched the team doing their best with what little they were given. Rick shifted, lips tight. We try to make it work, sir. Thompson nodded. I saw that too. I saw your leadership, Rick. And I saw your team follow it. He looked toward the cashier. And I saw compassion. Genuine kindness at the register, even when you were clearly exhausted. That matters more than any sales metric we've ever published. Her cheeks flushed as she looked down, biting a shy smile. But what struck me most, he continued, were 2 boys who stood behind me in line yesterday. The room grew still again. They weren't just customers. They were 2 kids trying to buy 1 meal between them. And they were counting coins like treasure, hoping they had enough for a burger. One of them whispered, Mom said this might be our only real meal today. There were gasps. One worker covered her mouth. Thompson's voice softened. I didn't come here looking for that story, but I needed to hear it. Because that story is part of what we've forgotten at the top. This business wasn't just built on recipes or branding. It was built on the idea that people, all people, should have access to something warm, affordable, and dependable. He stepped forward, no longer distant. So today, I'm not here to make anyone uncomfortable. I'm here to say thank you, and to make some promises. A breath of anticipation moved through the staff like a breeze. Starting this month, this location, and every other one like it, will receive new equipment. You'll be getting upgraded fryers, functioning cooling systems, and proper break spaces. Eyes lit up. One of the cooks whispered, no way, under his breath. Second, we're reinstating performance bonuses for peak hours and holiday shifts. No more pushing through madness without recognition. The cashier exchanged a stunned look with another team member. Third, we're rolling out a community meal program. Once a week, our stores will offer meals to families in need, no questions asked. We'll work with local shelters and schools. Those 2 boys reminded me of our responsibility, and I won't forget it. Rick's lips quivered slightly. That'll change lives, he said, voice cracking. Thompson nodded, eyes glistening now. That's the goal. He took a deep breath. I want every single one of you to know you are seen, not just as staff, not as costs or labor hours, but as people. And I promise this, the changes start today. There was a pause. Then, like a slow spark catching fire, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't polite. It wasn't formal. It was raw and real. The kind of clapping that comes from people who've waited too long to be heard. Tears welled in some eyes. The older woman who'd skipped lunch for her kids wiped at her cheek. The young man by the fryer punched the air with a grin. Rick finally smiled, genuinely, openly, for the first time in months. Thompson stood amid the sound, a little overwhelmed. But in the best way. He hadn't delivered a speech. He had simply told the truth. And the response reminded him that leadership wasn't about distance or dominance. It was about listening, seeing, acting. As the applause died down, Thompson gestured toward the kitchen. Now, if it's all right with you, I'd love to stay for lunch. On the line. Chuckles rippled through the room. The cashier laughed out loud. Rick clapped him on the shoulder. We'll get you an apron, sir. And for the first time, Thompson didn't feel like a stranger in his own restaurant. He felt like part of the team. The bell above the entrance chimed gently as families began to file into the newly renovated restaurant. Gone were the flickering lights and greasy corners. Everything looked refreshed, walls repainted, stainless steel gleaming in the open kitchen, tables neatly spaced for comfort, and a soft playlist humming beneath cheerful conversations. Behind the counter, staff moved with a sense of ease, their uniforms crisp, their eyes alert but light. There were still busy moments, but the tension had melted away. Smiles were genuine, breaks actually happened, and teamwork no longer felt forced. A new rhythm had taken hold here, something more human. At the far end of the dining room, a modest stage had been set up with a banner overhead that read, Community Meal Day. Everyone deserves a seat at the table. This wasn't just a company event. It was the launch of something bigger. Robert Thompson stood quietly off to the side, near a wall of framed photos showcasing moments from across the company's journey, grand openings, family meals, staff appreciation days. But today's gathering felt different. This wasn't about profit margins or PR. It was about presence. The crowd stirred, parting slightly as a young woman entered, holding the hands of two familiar boys. Their clothes were clean, their hair freshly combed, and their eyes bright. The same two boys who, weeks earlier, had hesitated over a handful of coins and whispered hopes for a full meal now walked with quiet pride. Thompson's gaze followed them. The manager, Rick, now beaming with new confidence, stepped forward to greet them. Welcome, he said warmly. We've saved the best seats for you. They were led to a table near the stage, already set with their favorite items. A small card read, Guest of Honor. The mother hesitated, eyes glistening. We've never been treated like this. Rick nodded gently. You deserve it. Nearby, the young cashier from that day handed the boys trays stacked high with fries, burgers, and ice cream cups. All yours, she grinned. And seconds if you want. Thompson watched the boys' faces light up, their laughter a melody he wouldn't soon forget. It reminded him why he'd built the business in the first place, but also how far he'd drifted from that original vision. He'd spent so long chasing growth, he'd forgotten what truly made a company strong. Its people. The microphone crackled as Rick stepped onto the small platform. Good afternoon, everyone, he began. Thank you for joining us for the first of what we hope will be many community meal days. Today's about more than food. It's about dignity, connection, and care. Applause swelled, warm and grounded. We're proud to be the first branch to roll out our new initiatives, thanks to the vision and support of someone who's not just our CEO anymore, but our teammate. He turned to Thompson. Robert, would you like to say a few words? Thompson hesitated for a second. He hadn't planned to speak. But then again, nothing meaningful ever came from staying silent. He stepped up, no notes in hand, no script, just clarity in his heart. When I walked into this place weeks ago, he began, I was pretending to be someone else. I thought I was here to assess operations, maybe spot a few flaws. He looked toward the two boys, now happily munching on fries. What I found was something much deeper. I heard two children wondering if they could split a single burger. And I saw a team stretched thin, doing their best under difficult conditions. He took a breath. That day changed me. There was no dramatic pause, no grand delivery, just truth. I realized our company had lost something. Not in our food or our service, but in our soul. We were feeding millions, yes. But were we really nourishing them? He glanced at the room, now filled with neighbors, employees, children, elders, all sharing tables, stories, and meals. That's why we've changed. Not just policies or training manuals, but our purpose. He gestured to the banner behind him. From now on, we're not just a fast food chain. We're a community partner. Our new mission is simple: feeding communities, changing lives. Applause broke out again, this time louder, more passionate. Not just polite approval, but real connection. We're rolling out subsidized meal programs across all locations. Our staff wellness initiative includes childcare support, flexible scheduling, and education stipends. Because how can we feed others if we don't first care for the people doing the feeding? Thompson's voice cracked slightly, but he didn't hide it. Success isn't about expansion. It's about impact. And I'm proud to say, this is just the beginning. He stepped back, met with a standing ovation. The boys clapped the loudest. Later, as the formalities gave way to mingling and shared desserts, Thompson didn't retreat to the back room or return to his car. He moved through the restaurant like any other patron. He cleared a table. He fetched napkins for a toddler. He chatted with an elderly man about how things used to be. And when someone asked who he was, he just smiled. Just a guy who loves this place. The final shot would linger on that moment, the CEO standing shoulder to shoulder with customers and employees, laughing at something a child had said, hands in his pockets, no spotlight needed. He wasn't above them anymore. He was among them. As the screen slowly faded to black, the new company slogan appeared: feeding communities, changing lives. And underneath it, a simple line in smaller font: sometimes, a single burger can change everything. If you enjoyed this story, ensure to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing, heartfelt stories like this. Also, let us know where you're watching from, and drop your thoughts in the comments. What did you think of Mr. Thompson's powerful transformation? How did the kindness of Rick, the young cashier, and the courage of the two boys move you? Their simple words sparked a company-wide change, and we want to hear how it inspired you. Remember, every small act of compassion counts. Stay tuned as we continue sharing stories that uplift, connect, and remind us of the good still in this world.